What's up guys, Intellitech Studios here, and today we're going to be doing a retrospective review on the Dyson DC41, as well as the Dyson DC65. I'm basically going to use this review to combine the reviews of both machines, since the only difference between the two is the cleaner head, and I'll touch on that later. But the Dyson DC41 is the first Dyson vacuum with the modern Dyson ball design language that we still see on the latest Ball Animal 3. This machine originally came out in 2011 and was mainly widely commercially available in 2012, and it's been massively updated. Well, not massively, I said that backwards. It's been very minimally updated since then, and the overall design of the machine has not changed since then, even with the latest Dyson Ball Animal 3. The biggest thing that has changed on the Dyson Ball uprights is the cleaner head. Everything else about the machine has remained mostly the same, with a couple tweaks here and there. So I'll mainly be focusing on the performance differences of this and the design of the cleaner head compared to the newer Ball Dysons, as that is the main difference between them. However, I will also do a separate video on discussing the differences between all of the modern Dyson cleaner heads, so I'm going to keep this review as brief as I can. At least that's my attempt as of me starting this. We'll see how long this ends up being. Starting off with the things that are similar compared to all the newer Dysons. What are you not going to be getting if you upgrade to a newer Dyson? Well, many of the parts of this design are the same. You have two filters, one that sits in the top of the bin and one that sits on the side of the ball. You still have the same exact bin assembly as the Ball Animal 2 and Animal 3. They're even interchangeable. All this is the same. The handle's the same. The wand is the same. The hose is the same. The power buttons are the same. The release catch is the same. On the UK versions of these machines, they have been updated, but on the newest Ball Animal 3 in the US, I don't really feel much of a difference. It's still the same mechanism where you pull it back and the wheels pop up out of the way. You can steer it with the ball and put it back up, and once you put it up, you have to push it forward until you hear a second click, and that's when you know that it's upright. Otherwise, the vacuum may fall backwards. You still have the same quick release wand with the wand cap that lifts up. Very simple. I have a third-party hose on my unit, so that does make the machine flex a little bit more, but that is kind of easy to demonstrate with a third-party hose. You can see that pops out very easily. The main body does flex a good amount, but to be fair, I actually did try to break this off camera. I tried to bend this all over the place and force it all over the place to see if I could get it to break, and it did not, although the button did end up breaking on this. But we can see this flexes a real good amount, so it doesn't feel the best in terms of build quality, but even, trying to mess this up doesn't really do a whole lot. Even if I'm really rough with it, it still hasn't broken, so credit where credit is due. It feels very cheap. It feels like it's not good build quality, but it's obviously held the test of time, so there is that. We have the same bin entry gasket, which is still in use today on the Ball Animal 3, Ball Animal 2, as well as the Kinetic Big Ball. This has caused some issues. A lot of times whenever you put this in the upright position or you're twisting it around with the ball, you'll sometimes hear a squeaking sound that's actually coming from this gasket pulling itself off of the bin while it's in use. So, sounds a little funny, but it doesn't really affect it as much as I thought it would. The bin still opens the same way. You press this button right here, this little latch pops out. Now, if you've had this machine for quite a few years, there are some parts that are prone to breaking, particularly on this bin. The button that's behind this red piece is prone to breaking. This little tab right here is prone to breaking. In fact, all these red parts that you see are prone to breaking, as well as the very small tab that holds the bin, that's also prone to breaking. But the good news is that this whole section is replaceable. Although, on the DC41, for some reason, if you break this button or anything on the cyclone assembly, Dyson expects you to replace the entire cyclone assembly, whereas on the newer units, you can just replace this top piece, and either way you can replace it. It's the same design, but as far as whether or not Dyson makes the parts available. But, like I mentioned, the parts are interchangeable, so if you break this button and you don't want to buy a third-party button, you can buy this top piece, and this actually pops off pretty easily. So a lot of that is easy to take care of if yours has broken after a number of years. Now, because of the way that this handle flexes, you are expected to pick it up via the bin handle, which is fine. I've noticed that whenever I pick it up, the entire spine does flex a little bit, and it makes me a little bit concerned, but I've been carelessly using it while testing it, and I haven't had any issues. It hasn't broken or even come close, so it's survived for the past almost decade, so you gotta give it credit where credit is due. Also, I should mention that my DC41 actually broke after I just had it repaired, so I'm using my Dyson DC65 for this review with the 41 parts fitted to it. Again, they are the same machine. The only difference between the two is the 65 has a slightly different cleaner head, and on the 65, the Cyclone shroud itself is not colored, it's just gray. Whereas on the 41, it actually does have the color of the Cyclone. You can see on this Animal Complete unit that comes in pink, or fuchsia, as Dyson calls it, this is pink. So that's the only cosmetic difference there. As far as looking at the attachments, they're the same as many different things. This combo tool is the same as the Kinetic and as the Ball Animal 1. It works very well, no complaints there. Sometimes this brush can have some issues, but if for whatever reason you don't like this attachment, you can upgrade to the newer combo tools that go with the Ball Animal 2 and Animal 3, and it fits on the same spot. Upholstery tool is the same, although with the 41 and the 65, the older variants do have an extra felt strip right here, the same as on the bottom. But in my experience, it doesn't make much of a difference. At first, I thought it was better, but after using them both side by side, there isn't much of a difference there. If you buy a replacement of these nowadays, it will look like this, and that pops on right there. Now, one issue that I found with this lower hose is very prone to breaking. Also, if you live in a dry climate, the changeover valve and its hose can sometimes break after a number of years. But if you're not in a dry climate, it doesn't tend to happen. My 41 was purchased from Nevada, which is known to be a dry climate, so presumably the previous owner who had it, not the person I bought it from, but the previous owner must have had issues with it. So there is that. Now, the changeover, or specifically the rear hose on my 41, which is over there, I don't feel like grabbing it, I had actually sent it into Dyson, and they fixed the lower hose, and then, after using it a couple times, the tab actually broke again. Now, in the case of this 65, this tab was broken when I bought it. I bought the part and I replaced it myself, so that's why it isn't broken anymore, because I replaced it myself. Although it is very difficult to replace, you have to completely disassemble the ball, and it's a little bit annoying. But in my case of the 41, I will actually be sending it back into Dyson shortly after this video, and I'll have my actual 41 back, the one that's over there. I'll actually have that back. But in the meantime, I want to get the review done because I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the 41. I may trade it in towards a new machine. And honestly, I generally recommend that you do the same thing. One thing that I will mention, though, is that the cleaner heads on the 41 are interchangeable between the DC65, the Dyson Ball Animal, and the Dyson Ball Animal 2, as well as the Kinetic, the Slim Ball. All those machines are interchangeable. You cannot get the new cleaner head from the Ball Animal 3. That is completely separate. It does not work. It does not fit. But if you have a DC41 and you like the machine, but you're otherwise not happy with the performance, or if you're considering upgrading your DC41 because your power heads went out, well, the good news is that you can actually buy the power head from the Dyson Ball Animal and Animal 2 that have the better performance than the 41 and 65, and you can fit those to your machine, and you'll get 99% of the newer machine's performance, as the main difference is the cleaner head. Now, you cannot do this fix to get the new anti-tangle head on the Ball Animal 3 because the actual connection part in the ball is completely different, and that's not a part that I'm aware of that you can replace. Certainly no customer would be able to do that. So in that case, you would have to upgrade to the new Ball Animal 3. But otherwise, you can actually upgrade and fit the new cleaner head to your old machine. But with that in mind, the new cleaner heads do perform a lot better in every single way. But is it enough to consider the upgrade if your 41 is working fine? Does the 41 by itself not clean well? Well, here's the thing. I've been using this DC41, again, this is technically 65, but I have the 41 head on it. I've been using this DC41 as my daily driver for the past week or so in preparation for this review, and I've used it for several times beforehand. Like I mentioned, I was using my actual 41 for several times before it broke again. And I have to say, the performance is not as bad as I thought. It still has pretty decent agitation, and it still does a great job at sucking itself to the floor. But there are a couple problems with the design of the cleaner head. And the first being is that the agitation still isn't as good as the newer Dysons. So while the cleaning performance is okay, there are plenty of other vacuums that outclean it, including newer Dysons, and including cheaper vacuums too. It is better than every previous ball Dyson that has been released. It cleans better than the DC15, and especially cleans better than the DC25, because the brushes are actually more dense, and they're actually a good amount stiff. In fact, I'll pull off the cleaner head real quick and show you the differences. Looking at this cleaner head, we can see that the brushes are actually fairly stiff, and the gaps in the brushes aren't nearly as bad as they are on the DC25. There still are a good number of gaps in this, so it doesn't clean as well as the Dyson Ball Animal and Animal 2, where the brushes not only are stiffer and more powerful, but they also have less gaps in them. And the Dyson Ball Animal 3 takes this up even further, where it's an entirely clean strip of brushes with no break for the belt. So you will have a dead spot right here where you have no cleaning path, so you will need to overlap your strokes on carpet in order to clean the spot that otherwise doesn't have contact. Now there still is suction contact, as you can see, but there's obviously no brushes on this part, so that won't clean the carpets. But this part right here and this part right here do a pretty decent job at cleaning the carpets. You've got little grooves in them to make it easier to cut off the hair, and this base plate comes off with no tools required. There's two little tabs right here that you can switch, and the base plate pops off. In fact, I'll do that right now. Now, unfortunately, unlike the newest Ball Animal 3, you do need tools in order to pull out the brush roller. We can see that there are two screws on either side, so there's two here to pull out this brush roll, and two here to pull out this brush roller. And you can easily get access to the brush roll in order to change them, get access to the bearings on the side, and to clean out these drives. Now, if you've had this machine for a while, you'll notice that this cleaner head does tangle in hair pretty easily, and hair does often get stuck in the drive shaft right here, so you need to make sure to keep that clean, otherwise this will have issues. Now, one other thing that this has issues with are the screws are very prone to stripping out, and both these issues that I just mentioned are still issues on the Ball Animal 2, but they've been fixed on the Ball Animal 3. One other thing that has been fixed on the Ball Animal 2 and the other variants, but has not been fixed on the DC41 and 65, is that this actual air passageway is very narrow. It's hard to see without this being removed, but you can see there's this very thin strip of a gap right here, and there's a bit of paper in here. We'll get this out of the way. You can see where hair and debris just collects right here, because the brushes on this side, there's very little space for the air to actually get into this channel. For whatever reason, this channel only has the slightest hole right here, and it's very shallow. So debris like hair and stuff will get clogged in here, and this side of the brush is not very well designed, as a lot of stuff that you pick up will get stuck in here. And this air passageway is very thin and very narrow, so it's not very good for airflow, and it's very prone to clogs. So that's the biggest deterrent for this cleaner head, is if you found yourself having issues with stuff and debris getting stuck in here, then you may want to consider upgrading your cleaner head to the newer Ball Animal 2 cleaner head, and that would mitigate that problem. Now, the Ball Animal 2 does still have issues where debris can get stuck in the little guard that runs behind the brush roller, but you can very easily remove that guard and not have it installed, and then the airflow and the ability for dirt to get into the cleaner head and past it into the bin is a lot better. So the DC41 does have a lot of issues with its cleaner head design, even though performance is surprisingly not that bad, all things considered. It's still not great. A DC41 is not a vacuum I'd recommend to get if you're looking for a deep cleaner, but that problem has been addressed on all of the newer Ball Dysons, and for what it's worth, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. It's not the best at extracting fine dust, and it definitely is not the vacuum to get if you're trying to extract sand out of your carpet. But as far as picking up hairs and pet hair and all that stuff, it will do fine with that. It's just a lot of the deep down grit, the stuff that actually destroys your carpets, where this isn't the best at. It would be the kind of machine where if you're using it after maybe your old vacuum died and it was a temporary machine, it would get you by, but it's not a machine I would rely on to keep your carpets clean and healthy if you have higher pile carpets like I do. If you have lower pile carpets, then the difference is not as noticeable, but it's still, even in that scenario, not as good at removing fine dust as the newer cleaner heads. So this overall, it still is the best cleaner head that Dyson had designed up to this point, save for maybe certain machines that were specifically designed for American carpets like the DC17, DC27, and DC28. But compared to all the previous ball vacuums, the DC41 was the best of its time, but we can see in hindsight that there still was a lot that needed to be changed and a lot that needed to be improved. And the good news is that Dyson seems to have addressed those concerns on newer units. But if you have a DC41, that alone may be a reason to retire it, or at least retire this cleaner head in favor of the newer one that comes on the Kinetic and Ball Animal 2. One other common port that can go wrong on this is the little bit right here that sits in the cleaner head to make the machine stable when it's upright. And I've noticed that this can often pop out of the way when you have the machine upright. So if you're using the tools, then this can often get pushed out of the way and the vacuum will fall to the side, and I'll demonstrate that in a sec. This wasn't actually addressed until the newest Ball Animal 3, and that the machine getting pulled over during tool use can cause these ends to chip off. For whatever reason, Dyson didn't make this its own assembly, and for some reason this is attached to the lower hose that you would again have to replace by disassembling the machine. So replacing the lower hose does fix this. And real quick, I'll demonstrate that flaw where it falls over, if I can at least. Let's see if the wheel gets caught on something. Well, okay, now it's not doing it. Now that I'm trying to demonstrate it, it doesn't want to happen. But yeah, usually it'll happen where the cleaner head will stay and this unit will fall towards me. But now that I'm trying to demonstrate it, it's not wanting to do it, which is funny. Okay, well, maybe if I just... There we go. Okay, so it mainly happens if you pull the machine back a little bit to where it starts to recline a little bit, and then it will clear that tab, and then it starts to fall over this way. So you can see where the cleaner head is still parallel to the floor, but the unit has fallen over a little bit, and sometimes it can fall and hit you. And I just heard a noise that scared me. Anyways, so this can happen. So just be mindful of that. Sometimes the unit can hit you if you are using the hose. It doesn't happen too often, but the good news is that it has been addressed on the newest Ball Animal 3. And I believe it may be that way on the DC40 as well, but don't quote me on that. I haven't tested that machine. The DC40 uses a different power head with a different connector and is not interchangeable with any of these machines, unfortunately, but the DC41 is. Taking a quick look at the brush roller on the DC65, the 65 does have stiffer bristles that are a bit closer together than the 41, and the actual bristles are a bit closer to the ground, so the 65 does clean better than the 41 significantly. Still not quite as good as the Dyson Ball Animal and Animal 2, the UP13, UP20 models, that sort of thing. And also the DC65 was the last one to have brakes in the brush roller for the ingest bars. These ingest bars were removed on the Dyson Ball Animal and Animal 2, the UP13, all those models. So that's another reason why those newer cleaner heads perform better, because they have more access to the carpet without these relatively ugly lines that don't get cleaned. That also combined with the fact that the brush roll on the newer ones are a bit more powerful than the 65. So the 65 is a good upgrade from the 41, but it's still not as good as the newest Dyson balls, the Animal 2 and Animal 3. So if you have a DC65, then upgrading to an Animal 2 probably isn't as big of an upgrade, But upgrading to the Animal 3 would be a pretty significant upgrade because you would have that better brush roller design. The 65, my particular 65, I can't even take the brush roller out anymore because several of the screws stripped out, and now I can't access the brush roller, which is a very big design flaw with these units. The screws are very cheap, and that leads to you having to basically replace the entire unit. This little wheel is also prone to breaking as well. So, unfortunately, these cleaner heads are known for a good amount of durability issues, but the 65 does perform better than the 41. But they're still relatively close. I do think the 65 does better than every previous Dyson. I think the 65 is very competitive with the DC17 and DC27 in terms of cleaning performance, but the 41, again, they're very similar other than those slight differences in the cleaner head. So given the fact that everything else is very similar to the newest ball Dysons, there isn't really much else to talk about. Chances are if you've had a 41 for this length of time, then you already know how the machine works, and you're already well used to it. I will link my video in the description on how to change the filters on your Dyson, because if you've had your machine for this long, I highly recommend changing the filters, as they can only wash out so many times. And also, some Dysons, I don't think the 41's known to have this issue, but some Dysons will make a very loud whining noise or a very strange noise whenever the HEPA filter has failed and is clogged up with dust. So replacing the HEPA filter will often solve that problem. So again, I'll link that video in the description to note so you can know how to change the filters on your Dyson. So the last thing we'll do is we'll do a pickup test with this cleaner head, and we'll go into our final thoughts. In traditional Intellitech Studios fashion, I put a bunch of potato flakes on the floor, transitioning between the carpet and the bare floor, and we're going to see how the DC41 does with these fine flakes. Now, of course, I'm going to have the brush roller on carpets and the brush roller off on bare floors. Okay, so looking at the carpet, I did pass it a couple times. We do have some flakes in the carpet, a bit more than average. Definitely not as good of a performance as the newer ball Dysons. And looking at the floor, we have some left, but not too bad on the floor, honestly. That's so slightly below average on carpet and slightly above average on the bare floor. Now, one thing you noticed is that with the active base plate design on these older Dysons, whenever I went very slowly over the potato flakes, it actually began to snowplow some of them because the active base plate really seals to the floor. And that also hurts its ability to be maneuverable on bare floors too, which can cause the body to flex as well because it really seals down to the floor, and of course doesn't let any big debris in, but still works great for fine debris for the most part. You could see where it did get most of the fine debris, except for the very, very fine particles that were stuck to the floor. So overall, it was a little bit above average on the bare floor performance and a little bit below average on carpet. Now, you could also see the lines where the actual ingest bars went through on the carpet, and for those particles I had to cross over them with the cleaner head slightly off center in order to get those bits as well. So it's acceptable, it's not great, but it's not bad either. It's certainly passable, but again, this is not the kind of machine that I pick specifically for deep cleaning carpets or specifically for cleaning bare floors because of those little issues, but it's certainly fine, and it definitely did get the job done. There are some flakes left on both surfaces, but a couple extra passes would take care of that, no problems. So, not the best, but definitely not the worst. So overall, the Dyson DC41 is definitely interesting to see how this line has actually improved over the last decade and change. But the key is, because obviously this machine is not available for sale anymore, thankfully, is it something that you should consider if you're looking for a cheap used Dyson? And honestly, that's hard to say. And by hard to say, I mean it's hard to recommend this. Unless, of course, you're a vacuum collector and you want to see the original ball in your collection, you can still find some of the 41 specific parts like the power head. So you could get one of these, refurbish it up into brand new condition, and keep it in your collection. But as far as any average consumer, I can't see any justification for having one of these. The only scenario I can think of is if you find one for sale used in great shape with a broken power head, where everything on the main body is in perfect condition, but the power head is dead. Where in that scenario, you could find a power head from the newer Dyson Ball Animal 2 for really cheap. And not just the Ball Animal 2, but the UP13, the UP20, the UP19, the UP14, they're all the same power head. If you got one of those power heads for really cheap, got the vacuum itself for really cheap, and upgraded the power head, then at that point you would basically have a Ball Animal 2, which is still a $500 vacuum, for, around 100, maybe 150. Then I could see you wanting to go for a 41. The only other scenario I could think of is if you had more delicate carpets, because this brush roller isn't nearly as aggressive as the newer Dysons. It's less likely to tear up your carpets. So if you have a very fragile carpet, and you really like your Ball Animal 2, but it's just too aggressive on your carpet, then finding one of these very well could be the solution, at least for that particular carpet. So, but, for anybody else, the Ball Animal 2 and Animal 1 and all of those machines are going to perform a lot better than the DC41 and DC65. And for used prices, you could find them for around the same amount of money. And that is pretty much that. Once in a while, you'll even get lucky and find a refurbished Ball Animal 2 for around $250 direct from Dyson, but those are really hard to come by now. I've tried to add one to my cart and review it, but the second I go to click buy, it's gone because there's not very many of them. So if you can get lucky and find a refurbished one for really cheap, for around the $250-ish range, then go for it. And again, that would again be a much better buy than the 41. So, yeah, the 41 is just in this really weird place. I wouldn't recommend it unless you get an absolute bargain for it, or like I mentioned, if you're able to upgrade the cleaner head, which again, they are interchangeable, and you would get 95% the performance of the latest generation Dyson. Not the latest Gen 1, which is the Animal 3, but, the Ball Animal 2, which they do still sell as of this recording. So, there is that. So yeah, the DC41, I attempted to make a short video on it, but I ended up rambling and making a 30-minute video. So I'm sorry about that. I tend to be a chatterbox. But, hey, it is what it is. So anyways, this was Intellitech Studios. Thank you for sticking around through the end of this video. If you did stick around to the end of this video, then, I don't know, type turtle muffin in the comments below. I don't know, just whatever. But anyways, thank you for sticking around, and let me know what your experiences are with the DC41 and how you like it or perhaps don't like it. And yeah, that is pretty much that. So, this is Intellitech Studios signing out with my retrospective review of the Dyson DC41 and DC65. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a good one. Peace.